Good evening again. I have a few items to update with you at this time. Many of you have asked about the bomb threats that the governor mentioned earlier. As he said, bomb threats were called in to multiple counties, which affected some polling locations and municipal buildings across Pennsylvania at the 7 p.m. hour. The governor's team and the Pennsylvania Department of State remain in direct contact with the Pennsylvania State Police, who are coordinating with local and federal law enforcement, as well as PEMA. Our law enforcement partners, who are members of the Election Threat Task Force, are handling the investigations. Again, as the governor said earlier, there's no credible threat to the public. We will provide more information about these threats as we're able. As an update, Cambria is doing a hand count of the ballots that could not be scanned at the precinct earlier today, as they've informed us. When ballots are returned that are not scannable for one reason or another, there are many options available to a county for how best to proceed to make sure that every voter's vote is counted. One of those is hand counting, which, as you can imagine, will take some time. It's typically done in bipartisan teams of two who would work together to conduct those hand counts, and the process would be open to observation by candidates and authorized representatives. As of a few moments ago, at least 41 counties have begun reporting their unofficial results to the Pennsylvania Department of State. Those unofficial results will be available tonight and in the coming days on electionreturns.pa.gov. As of 8:15 p.m., 87% of the nearly 2.2 million mail ballots sent out had been returned. If those estimates are correct, and the number will, of course, increase because mail ballots could be returned as of 8 p.m. So there'll be ballots that were returned to the drop boxes of the County Board of Elections that were not included in that 8:15 total. In terms of tracking the rest of those mail ballots, I remind you that 65 of our counties are obligated to report, as of 12:01 a.m., the total number of mail ballots they received, including those that have not yet been counted. That is a significant development since 2020, when counties had no such obligation. So we will know later this evening or the early morning the total number of mail ballots returned to counties that those counties are obligated to report that they have to count. Note that those numbers do not include overseas military and provisional ballots. The department will compile those reports on our website shortly after that time at vote.pa.gov. I'll be returning at 1 a.m. to answer some more of your questions as we continue to work with our counties to know more about the status of tabulation in Pennsylvania. And now I'm happy to take some of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Do you have any indication who is behind the bomb threats?
We don't at this time. We do know that they are not credible bomb threats, but that doesn't mean that that you don't take those sorts of things seriously.
Thank you.
I've had experience with threats of violence, and they're not always credible. You always have to take them seriously, but threats are intended to intimidate and coerce, and our election officials and our voters are not going to be intimidated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carter. Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's all good. So I'm curious about the mail ballot registration challenges that are still outstanding. You know, what does that mean in terms of administration in the counties that have those, and in regards to sort of what that may mean for the timing of the results?
So for the counties that have so far or for the counties that received challenges to overseas voters, those hearings continue. The most recent one was early this afternoon. In every one of those hearings so far before the boards of elections, every one of those challenges has either been dismissed or withdrawn, and I would expect that to continue. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mr. Secretary. Back to the bomb threats. I understand this is under investigation, but can you provide a little more detail? For example, can you say how many counties they occurred in? And also, are there similarities or things that are identical about them that you can say, well, these were all the same group or similarity? And were these by phone, email, anything like that to flesh it out? There's a lot of interest in it.
To our knowledge, and we're working with our law enforcement partners on this, who will have up-to-date information. The threats were conveyed via email message to multiple counties in Pennsylvania.
Mr. Secretary, we saw a lot of long lines, particularly at universities around the state today. Do you have any idea why that is?
In my experience, Carter, having run elections for 10 years in Philadelphia County, which has several universities, having long lines at precincts with significant numbers of students is not an infrequent occurrence. It is also not a sign that the county is not did not appropriately plan for election day or anything like that. Frequently, when you have precincts located at universities, you have students show up who are not registered to vote or not registered to vote in Pennsylvania, who might vote by a provisional ballot. That provisional ballot, as you know, would not ultimately be counted if you're not a registered voter in Pennsylvania. And that can add to the time it takes to process voters. So that is not, in my experience, an unusual thing to occur in a presidential general election with high turnout and great interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there are a number of counties. I know you mentioned Cambria, but there's Erie as well, and a few others that just have not, at least as far as I looked before you came in here, returned any results. Are there specific reasons for that in different counties, or what part of the administration is causing that?
So we have a liaison at the Department of State assigned to be in constant contact with every one of those counties, not just in the lead up to Election Day, but throughout Election Day, and especially when election results are being reported, either on their website or to the Pennsylvania Department of State. We understand that Erie, on the walk over here, checked, and we understand that Erie has not reported a significant number of results yet. Our liaison's reaching out to them to find out why that is occurring. That doesn't mean that ballots aren't being counted, but we haven't seen them upload results as of yet.
Thank you.
I want to add with Erie, because Erie was, in many ways, I think, an example of what happens when issues do occur in preparation and administration of an election. There was an issue with ballots being sent out or that voters had requested and not received. Pennsylvania Department of State worked very closely with Erie from the moment that issue was known to provide guidance to them, to provide advice to them, and to work them through it. And last I looked, Erie had at least as high a return rate as the average return rate in our counties, which I think really shows how seriously Erie took that problem and has seemingly overcome it. When issues do occur in the administration of an election, which are unavoidable because they do occur with 67 counties and, as you can imagine, many thousands of election workers, it really always comes down to if you're prepared to address those issues. You want to minimize the opportunity for issues to occur, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is that they are addressed so that every voter can cast their vote and have their vote counted.
Secretary, I was hoping you could share any more details about Cambria County and what the root of the problem is there. We've heard that it was something with the way the ballots were printed, that wasn't enabling them to be scanned. Do we know why this wasn't caught during logic and accuracy testing?
So what we found out about the issue, obviously, immediately after polls opened, and reached out to Cambria County, reached out to the vendor that provides equipment and assistance to Cambria County as they work through that problem. At first, it was unclear whether it was an issue with the tabulator or scanner or with the ballot. And as we understand it, the issue was with the ballot in terms of its ability to be scanned into the tabulator. So that doesn't affect it did not affect a voter's ability to vote. They use hand-marked paper ballots in Cambria County. So they had pre-printed ballots. So voting could continue even if they could not, in the precinct, be tabulated at that time. All those ballots are secured in a receptacle, a secure receptacle at the precinct, and then taken from the precinct to the central county location for tabulation, which is called central tabulation. When you do have issues with voting systems that are unable to tabulate results in precinct, that is a normal thing that you would do. Voters showing up could still vote on their hand-marked paper ballot. They could still make their selections. Their votes will be counted.
Has the county shared with you at all what the problem with the ballot was? Is it possible they were using the wrong weight of paper? I know that was an issue in Luzerne in 2022 when they ran out of paper.
I don't want to speak to what the exact issue was with the either formatting of the ballot or its readability, but it appears to be an issue with how the ballot was prepared.
Thank you.
And obviously, we'll be in touch with the county about why that issue would not have been identified prior to election morning.
Mr. Secretary, kind of a catch-all question. Has there been any other issues, any counties where things happen that maybe haven't surfaced publicly, whether that be polling place problems, tabulation problems, or litigation?
Yes, and it's always a challenge to answer that question because you're talking about some number, as you said, a catch-all question. You're talking about some number of issues that could have occurred at varying degrees of significance. So, for example, a polling place that opened late that I mentioned earlier that got an extension to stay open until 9:30. So what you normally see on election day, and is never intended to minimize the importance of it, right? Because there are no redos, there's no do-overs. Everything ought to be perfect every time, and the counties work throughout the year to make sure that that's the case. But you do occasionally, with more than 9,000 precincts, have some precincts opening late or some other issues that occur along the way. But we keep track of those issues, work with the county to make sure that they're resolved, so that if a problem does occur, the problem is resolved and voting can continue uninterrupted. But certainly throughout the day, there are isolated precinct-level issues that occur. And again, please don't think that I'm minimizing any issues that occur on an election day. Even if the janitor shows up 15 minutes late, that's an issue. But we've worked with the counties to resolve those issues as they occur.
And if I may,
yes, sir.
How do you see voting happening overnight? Do you think are counties just going to keep going with a full crew or like a skeleton crew? This is a test of that, right?
With Act 88, which provided significant funding for counties, it provided more resources to get new equipment that they didn't have in 2020. Counties also have a lot more experience now than they had in 2020, which was the first time any of us experienced a significant volume of mail ballot voting in Pennsylvania. And also, while mail-in ballot voting is clearly very popular in Pennsylvania, the total number of votes cast by mail ballot is fewer during that peak COVID environment in 2020. So you'll have new equipment, more experience, and fewer votes to count. It's why I'm confident the reporting process will move faster than it did in 2020, other than perhaps in Cambria or some other isolated locations. And I think, at the end of the day, it always comes down to how close an election is before you know who won and who lost. Whether you have mail ballots or you don't have mail ballots, where you have one type of voting system or another type of voting system. So with close elections, it takes longer before you know the ultimate outcome. But I'm confident, as I mentioned earlier, having visited the 67 counties, they've been preparing for this election at great lengths. They are well aware of the level of scrutiny. They are well aware of the importance of these elections for all offices on the ballot. And am confident that they'll be working late into the evening, if not into the next day or two, if necessary, to count their voters' votes. Act 88, which I mentioned before, put an obligation on counties that accept that funding to begin at 7 a.m. and to continue the tabulation and reporting of results in a way that is uninterrupted. Frequently, like in 2020, you would hear about counties going home, like reports that voting stopped in Philadelphia, or voting stopped in Philadelphia at 8 p.m., that tabulation or the county officials weren't working through the night, and they were. Even with a live stream, you could see for yourself from the comfort of your home that voting, that tabulation of results continued. So only a few counties did not accept Act 88 funding, and those counties don't have an obligation to participate in what I referred to as the 1201 report earlier, or continue tabulation of results in an uninterrupted way. Okay, so we're going to return to the Department of State, and we'll be back at 1 a.m. To answer any additional questions and provide any additional information we've gathered. Thank you.